Being a girl who plays video games can be pretty tough sometimes. Note that I said girl who plays video games and not bloody gamer girl, since that term seems to be now irrevocably associated with dirty bathwater and a Twitch thought turned scam artist. That's just one of the things you get. Others just assume you're trash at the game because of what's between your legs. The only time I ever get any real respect from guys is when I prove I'm actually good at the game we're playing. Not that all guys are like that. I'd actually say that most don't really care that I'm a girl, but when it gets bad, it gets really bad. And sometimes, that's all it takes to ruin the experience for me completely. But there was one incident that occurred while I was playing online that put me off gaming entirely for quite a while. This is the story of Twi'lek Zane. I met Twi'lek Zane one night on Sea of Thieves. For those that don't know, Sea of Thieves is an awesome multiplayer game where a crew of 2 to 4 players take control of their very own pirate ship. I was a huge fan of the Disney Pirates franchise when I was a kid. Still am, I suppose. So the idea of a game like that was hugely appealing to me. I had a lot of fun on Sea of Thieves, for a while anyway, until one night I found myself on a ship with a crew member called Twi'lek Zane. Zane, as we'll call him, was nice at first. He seemed a little surprised to find himself sailing with a real-life girl, but a lot of people are and just get over it pretty quickly. Zane seemed like one of those guys, kinda quiet but perfectly nice otherwise. He kinda faded into the background for the most part, being overshadowed by much louder, more extroverted crew members that ran around showing off their pet parrots and playing their musical instruments. At one point, after fighting a ship full of skeleton pirates, I needed to regenerate some health. So I go below deck to our little food barrel and pick out a few pineapples to nom on to get myself back to full strength. I made a remark to the guys about eating all the ship's pineapples and how it was making me hungry in real life. They asked what my favorite food was, and my reply is probably in line with like 80% of people everywhere. Pizza, I told them. This sparked off a little debate on ship when one of the crew threw the question out there. How do you feel about pineapple on pizza? Now, unlike most of civilized society, I actually kind of liked Hawaiian pizza. I just can't resist the whole sweet and salty thing that it has going on. But when I tell them that, this sparks off something of a mutiny. The 2 louder crew members start laughing, and one even jumped off the ship, saying he refused to sail with someone who liked pineapple on pizza. It was funny, sure. We had a few laughs. All the while, Twi'lek Zane stayed quiet, not saying a word as we had our little bit of banter. About 45 minutes go by, and I'm getting hungrier and hungrier, so I tell the guys I'm about to jump off to go make some food and that I'd be back on afterward. Then I hear my doorbell. Luckily, my flatmate was home, so I didn't have to worry about rushing off to answer it. So I don't really take much notice of the exchange I can hear through my bedroom door, but I did start to take notice when I heard my flatmate's footsteps coming up the stairs to my room. As she opens the door, I slide off my headphones and there stands my roommate with a pizza box in her hands. It was a godsend to trust my BFF to just know when I was hungry. Or at least, that's what I thought. I was so hungry that I actually cut her off and asked her if I could have a slice of her pizza, as I was absolutely ravenous. She looks confused, then says she was about to ask me the same thing. I'm beyond confused at this point, so I ask the guys on Sea of Thieves to hold on a minute. I mute my mic, then turn back to my friend. My jaw is on the floor by the time she's finished talking. The pizza delivery wasn't for her at all. It was for me. What's more, it had been paid for, and the topping was, you guessed it, ham and pineapple. I felt sick. I told my friend she could have it, that I wasn't feeling very hungry anymore. In a confused voice, she thanks me and turns to leave, but asks me if I'm feeling okay before she shuts the door. I just lie, straight up lie, and tell her I'm fine. Just a bit under the weather, I suppose. When she shuts the door, I get right back on the PC. It was horrible. I found myself asking a question that I already knew the answer to. Did one of you guys order me food? The first 2 louder sailors said no, with one actually laughing at what seemed like such a bizarre question. But Twi'lek Zane was silent, His character just stood still on deck, quietly watching and listening as the situation unfolded. And then he spoke up. "Enjoy," is all he said. I freaked out. I pulled the Ethernet cable out of the back of my computer so hard the connection snapped off and remained in the slot. But it was severed, and that's all that mattered. But it was way too late, and that was the worst thing of all. There was no way for me to know just how much information Zane had acquired just from using my Microsoft ID and IP address. If he managed to work out my home address, what other information had he been able to dredge up? The only comfort I could possibly take in the whole thing was that, because of his accent, I knew he was North American. But that didn't rule out the possibility that he was either living or studying in the UK and was actually much, much closer than I first thought. I barely slept the week that followed. Nightmares came every single night. Nightmares in which I'd wake up to a figure standing over my bed, a crooked smile twisting their lips before they pounced. I'd wake up crying, bed sheets soaked in a cold sweat, with my roommate rushing into my room to see if I was okay. In the end, I told them everything, and they drove me down to the police station immediately. There I spoke to an internet safety officer who was overloaded with cases just like mine, but all they could do was tell me to block the person in question, to possibly avoid the same game as them, but generally to carry on as normal. Basically, there was absolutely nothing they could do, and that's what's so scary, that maybe the internet will never be a safe place for girls like me. No matter what we do, there will always be people whose predatory attitudes seem to override all normal human feeling.
This happened on a weekend, dead in the middle of winter. I'm an only child and 7 years old. This night, my parents finally agreed to my pleas to go to Chick-fil-A for dinner. It was around 7 p.m., but since it was winter, it was already pitch black outside. We showed up, and we went inside to find the place was decently busy, though it was a weekend, so that was to be expected. We ordered our food, and I went to go pick out where we'd sit. I remember picking a booth in the corner, right next to the play place. Right as the server brought over our food, I quickly began eating my chicken nuggets, knowing that the quicker I ate, the more time I'd have to be in the play place. When I finished, I asked my parents if I could go play, and of course they agreed. I was inside for maybe 10 minutes, when through the windows I saw that cow mascot Chick-fil-A sometimes has out to interact with the kids. I instantly got excited. It was really rare to see the cow, as Chick-fil-A rarely had someone in the costume. I remember seeing him high-fiving the kids walking around the building. A few minutes went by, and the cow proceeded to walk up to the play place and open the door. I instantly ran up to him and gave him a high five. But just then, the guy in the costume gave me that hand motion to follow him, and without a second thought I did. We first went out the play place door, and then to my surprise the actual building through an exit in the back. At that point, even at my young age, I realized something wasn't right. As we got outside, the guy took off his cow mask. To my surprise, the guy was really old, maybe mid-60s. The guy was sweating really hard, and it honestly looked like he hadn't showered in weeks. I guess I never thought of what I expected the person who was in the costume to look like, but it definitely wasn't that. Seconds after he took off his mask, the dude started to literally pick me up. Now, at 7 years old, I didn't weigh that much, so he had no struggle grabbing me. Now knowing for sure something wasn't right, I squirmed to try to break free, but it didn't work. The guy proceeded to walk to a car in the very back of the parking lot. He dug in his pocket and pulled out some keys. My heart dropped when I heard the sound of the trunk of the car opening. My squirming intensified. I was full on screaming at that point. But luckily, before the guy could stuff me in his trunk, police sirens rang out. It was the most relieving sound I could have heard in that moment. The guy dropped me in reaction, got in his car, and sped off. About a minute later, my parents came running outside. I told them everything, and they were absolutely panicked. Apparently, the guy was caught only about 5 blocks away as the police saw his car speeding out of the parking lot and assumed it was him. The story goes that the guy who was in the costume held the actual employee with the costume at knife point in the parking lot, demanding he give him the suit. The employee complied and drove away, but called the police on him shortly after. Now that I'm older, I routinely think back to that encounter. If the cops had shown up literally 30 seconds later, I would have been in that man's trunk and he would have successfully gotten away with me. As far as I know, the guy was put in prison, and still is to this day for multiple attempts of child abduction. This happened 4 years ago. I was 12, going on 13 in just a month or two. My friend, Lindsay, was 14, which was quite a bit older than me, at least at the time, as the 2-year age gap was pretty big. We met in school, and quickly became close friends. We were spending almost every single weekend together. Nothing seemed to be out of the ordinary. It was your typical Friday night. We carpooled to our family's apartment after school to spend the night together. After we ate dinner, me and Lindsay went to go hang out in her room. Now, Lindsay wasn't always a positive influence. She had a habit of talking to older guys online and lying about her age. Lindsay showed me some texts between her and a man she was talking to. I don't remember exactly what they said, but they consisted of him trying to convince her to meet up with him and just the usual things you'd expect from a creep online. According to him, he was 19, tall, and blonde. And once I saw the texts, I asked for a picture of him. Something didn't sit right with me after seeing the messages. She showed me what he looked like, and he was very clearly not 19. The man was at least 40, and looked like he lived in his mother's basement. That's when Lindsay's phone started ringing. It was the guy. Lindsay answered without hesitation, and when I heard the voice on the other end of the call, I felt like I was going to be sick. I could clearly hear the guy trying to convince Lindsay to meet up with him. Lindsay replied saying she couldn't, because she was spending the night with a friend. The mention of that must have sparked his interest, as the guy then proceeded to try and ask to meet both of us. Lindsay, lacking any common sense, said yes, and thus began our plan to sneak out and walk to meet this random guy in a Chick-fil-A parking lot. I obviously didn't want to go. I was raised on stories of what happens to teen girls who meet random men from the internet in person. But after adamant pleading from Lindsay that she didn't feel safe going by herself, I agreed. We took our phones with us for the walk. The route we had to take to get there didn't have very many street lamps, and there weren't any houses. We were surrounded by trees on both sides of us. When we got to the parking lot, it was almost empty. The Chick-fil-A was about 15 minutes from closing, and since Lindsay hadn't received a text from the guy saying he was there yet, we decided to go inside. We ordered some milkshakes and went to go sit on one of the booths while we waited. But while we were sitting inside, I couldn't help but notice a car pulling into the parking lot, just continually circling the building. The car clearly wasn't looking for a parking spot, as it went around the building very slowly around 10 times. All the while, me and Lindsay were just watching it from inside. After we finished our milkshakes, the car was gone, and Lindsay never got a text from the guy saying he was there, so we just decided to head back home. I was honestly insanely relieved that the guy never ended up showing up, but as we were walking home, I couldn't help but notice how many times a car had passed us. The street we walk on to get back was almost completely desolate, with trees on either side of us, so to have even 2 cars pass us would have been rare. But I ignored it. It didn't look like Lindsay even noticed. We got home, and since it was late, we decided to just go to bed in Lindsay's room. Fast forward to around 4 a.m., we woke up to a loud bang. It sounded like someone smacking on the window, though Lindsay's room was on the 2nd floor, meaning something must have been thrown. Me and Lindsay both sat up and looked at each other. The sound came again, that same bang. We both agreed someone had to have been outside, and just then, we heard the heart-dropping sound of a voice whispering, "Hey Lindsay, it's me. I followed you guys home." We both instantly panicked in reaction. We knew exactly who that was. I started crying. I was honestly terrified. Lindsay ran to her parents' room and explained the situation. Her parents instantly called the police, but of course, when they showed up, the guy was gone. Lindsay went to show them the conversations, but the account was deleted. Neither of us remembered the username either, so there was quite literally nothing the cops could do but take a report. The whole encounter was really disturbing. Lindsay's parents were really mad with her, and this caused me to lose connection with her as a friend over the next few months. I haven't seen her in a while, and I'm not entirely sure whatever ended up happening with the whole situation. I just hope that guy never returned. This happened a few months ago at a Chick-fil-A in my hometown. It was a Thursday, and I was just getting off work. I got off insanely late this night. It was like 9 or 10 p.m. I decided I wouldn't have time to make myself food before I went to bed, so I just went to Chick-fil-A on my way home. I pulled into the parking lot and went inside. I ordered my food and went to a table near the back to wait for it. I couldn't help but notice how little people were actually inside the Chick-fil-A this night. There were like 5 other customers, which is insanely rare for Chick-fil-A, at least the one I go to. Now, I should add, I'm 23 and female. After a while of sitting in my spot, a strange guy walked over and placed a full cup of soda on my table. He said something about how he finished his food already and didn't drink any of his drink, but didn't want it to go to waste, so he was giving it to me, though he was mumbling the whole time and could barely even hold eye contact with me. It was pretty creepy, but I didn't really pay much attention to it. I just wrote it off as some random guy trying to flirt with me. That's when I noticed, about a few tables in front of me sat another guy. He was watching me insanely close. Now, this really creeped me out. I really didn't like the feeling of somebody just watching me eat like that. The dude just continued to sit there, watching me, almost the whole time I was eating, even though he had no food in front of him. Finally, a few minutes later, the dude left the building. At this point, the place was almost closed, and I was the last customer inside the building. Though, I was still insanely creeped out. I grabbed my trash, along with the drink that guy gave me, and threw it all out. I then asked one of the male employees if he could walk me to my car, and proceeded to explain the whole situation. The guy was really understanding, and he instantly dropped what he was doing to walk me out. We got outside, and I proceeded to lead him to my car. We kept walking, and that's when I saw 2 men crouch behind the other side of my car that wasn't visible from the building. I almost screamed, and they started to get up out of their crouching stance, slowly walking towards me. That was until they saw the employee that walked me out, and one of them quickly said, sorry, we have the wrong car. And they walked off. They were the same guys from inside the Chick-fil-A. I knew they were. One was the guy who handed me his drink, and the other was the guy who was watching me. I instantly called the cops and explained everything, though I left shortly after, as I was pretty shook up over the whole situation. I was never actually made aware if those 2 guys were ever caught. All I can assume is they tried to drug me with whatever drink they gave me that night, all in an attempt to make it easier to kidnap me. But luckily, I wasn't stupid enough to actually drink it. Still though, this experience really scared me and caused me to never go back to that Chick-fil-A again.
I woke up one evening and looked outside my window. The fog was just settling in. It always gets foggy during the winters in our small town. I got freshened up and got ready for work. I worked the night shift at the local pizza center. As I got ready for my shift, my eyes fell upon an old family photo. It always brought a smile to my face. That photo was the last memory I had with my parents before they met with an accident and passed away last year. I got in my car and started driving to work. The fog was thick that night, and the smell of burning wood from the local farms around the town settled in the air. I liked it. It reminded me of the late-night drives my dad used to take me on when I was a kid. I reached work and met my friend Lizzie as I entered. "The fog has never been so thick," she said. It was a Thursday night, and I didn't expect a lot of deliveries on that night. As I sat waiting for the first order to come in, the local news caught my attention. It spoke of the disappearance of a young man named Elton. That took me by surprise. I knew Elton. He used to be my classmate in college. What could have happened to him, I wondered. This was the second missing person case that had sprung from our town this month. "What's wrong?" Lizzie asked as she saw my face watching the news. I knew him. Elton and I were best friends in college. I replied to her. "Well, I hope they find him," Lizzie said. "Anyway, the first set of deliveries are ready." I picked up the pizzas and started making my way out. "Be careful. The visibility tonight is low," my manager said to me as I walked out the door. I strapped the pizzas to the front seat of the car. I had 2 deliveries to make, and sadly, they were both in complete opposite directions. I sat in the car and looked at the 2 addresses I had to deliver to. The first one I knew, but the second one, I had never been there before. In fact, I never even knew that people lived at that location. "That's strange," I mumbled to myself. I'd grown up in this town and had been living there for 21 years now. and not once have I ever heard of or ever been to a house in that location. That part of town was supposed to be abandoned as far as I could remember. Moreover, the address seemed incomplete. I figured I'd just have to get there and then find the place. I didn't overthink it and started driving. After all, I could not afford to be late. Pizzas need to be delivered hot. With no time, I reached the first location and delivered the first pizza. The old lady who ordered gave me a nice tip. I got back in my car and started heading towards the second location. As I drove down the cold, misty night, a sense of anxiety kicked in. Like, as if I knew something was not right. Something was off. I couldn't figure out what it was. Just a bad feeling. This second location was on the outskirts of our town. As I reached closer, the roads got more and more narrow and rough. After a certain point, there were no streetlights, too. I had to completely rely on the headlights of my rusty old wagon. As I drove through the darkness, the car suddenly started to vibrate until the point where it stalled. I knew I should have changed the battery this week, I thought to myself. My car had stopped, and I was in the middle of nowhere. I kept playing around with the battery until it finally started, and boy, was I relieved. I'm not one to get scared easily, but if I'm being honest with myself, it was indeed an eerie night. After driving for a while, I finally saw the house in the distance. It was an old, abandoned mansion, or at least it looked abandoned. Who could possibly live there? I said to myself. I reached the front of the house, picked up the pizzas, and got out. By this point in time of night, the fog was so thick I had to use my phone's flashlight just to watch my steps. There was not much light around. The whole house was covered in darkness, with the exception of a dim yellow light coming out of a single window. I could hear wild dogs howling in the distance. I approached the front door of this huge, dull mansion and rang the bell. Turns out, the bell never rang. It was not in working condition. So I knocked. I heard the sound of wood creaking, along with heavy footsteps approaching the door. As the door opened, I saw a big middle-aged man in front of me. He was pretty well built and had a long beard. His face was covered with small scars. They looked as if he had been scratched. He had a blank look on his face and just stared at me without saying a word. After a few seconds of awkward silence, I cleared my throat and said, "Your pizza, sir?"
"Ah, yes. Food,"
he replied in a heavy, dull voice. I handed him the pizza and he took it and walked back in, leaving the door open. As he walked in, he threw the pizza box across the table and said,
"Wait here."
I remember thinking to myself, who would just throw a delicious pizza on the table like that? The action was pretty rugged, like as if he never really wanted the pizza. He walked deeper into the house to get the money for the bill, I assumed. With every step he took, the wooden floor creaked. He walked deeper into the house until I couldn't see him anymore, but I could still hear the sound of his footsteps, and the wooden floor creaking with every step. And then it stopped. There was nothing but absolute silence. I stood at the door waiting. The inside of the mansion was worn out. A few minutes passed, and I had not seen or heard anything yet. What's taking him so long? I said out loud. I felt a hard hit on my head from the back, and I just fell into darkness. The next thing I remember is opening my eyes. I was on the grounds, inside the mansion. It didn't take me long to realize I'd been knocked out unconscious. Someone knocked me out from behind, I thought. What's happening? I was confused and could still feel pain on the back of my head. As I tried to reach my hand to the back of my head, I realized I was tied down. My hands were tied behind my back and my legs were tied together. "What the hell?" I whispered. The dim yellow light covered the room. I looked around and saw the pizza on the table. It had not been opened. Suddenly, I heard a husky voice. "Ah, you're awake." And as I looked to my right, I saw the man standing at the end of the hall. He slowly walked towards me as his face came into the light. I saw the most wicked smile I had ever seen on his face. Fear kicked in. "Why am I chained? Let me go!" He put his fingers to his lips and went, "Shh. It's time to eat," he said and walked into the other room, which happened to be his kitchen. "What? I'm not hungry! Let me go!" I shouted. I heard the sounds of rattling plates and spoons from the kitchen. It stopped and he walked out. He walked out with a meat knife in his hand. A chill ran down my spine as I looked at the knife, and his bland face staring at me. I started to tremble with fear. He came closer and bent towards me and said again, "It's time to eat!" And he stabbed the knife into the back of my leg. It was in this very moment I realized what he meant. When he had said, "Ah, yes, food," when he had opened the door for me, he was not talking about the pizza I came to deliver. I was the food. This demon of a man was a goddamn cannibal, and I was his dinner. I burst out in tears and cried and yelled and begged for him not to kill me. He put his bloody hand against my mouth and shut me up and said, "I'm not gonna kill you. Not yet." Stabbed the knife back into the calf of my leg and began cutting. I could not do anything except sit and watch as he cut my flesh. I cried and yelled, but that did not bother him. This pain, I never felt anything like it. It was bad, and every second it got worse. As he cut into my leg, I could feel the edge of the cold metal knife touch my bone with every stroke. He cut out a fist-sized piece of the back of my leg, and then stopped. "This should be enough for now," he said. He picked up my flesh and walked into the kitchen, while I lay there bleeding out and crying in pain. I began to realize he was not going to kill me in one go. He was going to keep cutting bits of pieces out of my body for days to come, until I died. It was going to be a slow and bloody death. As I lay there crying, he returned after a few minutes with a belt and bandages. He tightened the belt around my thigh in order to prevent me from losing too much blood, and wrapped the bandage around my leg. He didn't want to kill me right away. He wanted his meat to stay fresh. As he did that, I kept yelling and talking to him, asking why he was doing this to me, and begged him to let me go. He never said a word back. After he was done, he went back into the kitchen and started cooking my flesh. I could even smell it. He came out after about an hour with food on his plate. It was flesh from my leg that had just been cooked. He sat on the table and ate meat from my body right in front of me. Every now and then he would look at me and give me the evilest smile while he ate. After he was done, he walked up the stairs and went to sleep as I lay there in excruciating pain. My pants were soaking wet because of all the blood on the floor. I looked around the hall, and as I began to become more aware of my surroundings, something caught my eye. It was a watch that had fallen under the chair. I recognized that watch instantly. It was Elton's watch. He didn't just go missing. He was eaten alive and murdered by the same monster. I realized I was not his first victim. He had done this before, to God knows how many poor innocent souls. That would probably explain the scars on his face. Somebody tried to escape and ended up scratching his face in the process. I started to think to myself, I need to do something. I need to find a way to escape. I knew I would barely be able to walk after he cut out flesh from my leg, but I had to try. I tugged on the rope that tied my hands to a ring in the wall. I kept pulling in an attempt to free my hands. I pulled and pulled, and I felt a sudden jolt of intense pain. I had just dislocated my wrist, which only added to the already existing pain in my leg. I cried softly, and as I leant forward in disappointment, my hand slipped out of the ropes. My dislocated wrist allowed enough space between my hand and the rope to set my hands free. Although I was in pain, I had a sense of hope now. I gathered the courage and started untying the rope on my legs. I tried to stand up, but the pain was too much. I had to balance myself on one leg. I started limping around the hall as quietly as I could and started searching for my keys and phone. The dumb fool did not even hide it. It was right beside the pizza box on the table where he ate. I grabbed my keys and phone and instantly thought, "Elton!" I bent down and grabbed his watch. As I made my way to the door, I peeked into the kitchen, and what I saw scarred me for life. Glass jars filled with remains of human body parts, eyes, teeth, blood. I saw pieces of rotten skin all over the kitchen counter. I nearly threw up. I took a step back in horror, and the goddamn wooden floor. Immediately, I heard footsteps coming from above me. I had woken him up. I heard him walk towards the staircase. I knew I had to get out of there, and fast. I limped my way to the door as fast as I could. I opened the door and stepped out. As I looked back, I saw the cannibal. He was halfway down the stairs already. No! He yelled at me. I made my way to the car as fast as I could. I opened the door and slammed it shut behind me and locked it. As I looked to my left towards the house, he was gone. And just as I began to think I had escaped, he slammed the window to the right of my car and broke it and reached for me. I put the keys in the ignition and turned it, but the car never started. That bloody battery! I yelled. The cannibal reached for the door lock from the inside of the car and pulled it up, thereby unlocking the door. That wicked smile swept across his face again. As he stepped back to open the car door, I turned the key again and BAM! I heard the engine of my old rusty wagon roar. I hit the gas with my leg that wasn't injured and drove off abruptly. The cannibal fell to the ground with the way I drove off. I could barely see what was ahead of me. It was still dark and foggy outside, but I kept driving full speed ahead. I reached for my phone and tried to switch it on, but it was dead. I kept driving until I found the road. I went straight into town and right to the hospital. That was the first time that night I felt safe. The nurse quickly took me in as she removed the bandage on my leg. I saw the look of terror on her face as she uncovered the wounds. I was given a dose of anesthesia and knocked unconscious as the doctors needed to operate on my leg. When I woke up, it was a bright day. As I opened my eyes, I was surrounded by the doctor, Lizzie, my manager, and the cops. Lizzie smiled at me and said, "It's going to be okay." As I pushed forward in an attempt to see how my leg was doing, I felt absolutely nothing. I pulled off the blanket and started crying after what I saw. I didn't have half my leg. The doctor said that they could not save the leg and that they had to amputate it. My whole body went numb with the shock. The fact that I would never be able to walk again slowly sunk in. I gathered myself and explained to the cops what happened. They took my statement and began an investigation right away. They came back later that evening and told me that they found the mansion and all the gross body parts and saw the blood, but they couldn't find the cannibal. He was nowhere to be seen. I was left with a feeling of anger. I cried myself to sleep that night. I couldn't help but pity myself. The next morning, I woke up late to find a pizza with a note resting on top of it. I remember thinking, this must be Lizzie. She must have come in and left me a pizza after a shift. The nurse who was walking by at the moment smiled at me and said, "You had a visitor earlier today while you were asleep. He was happy to see you." I froze with fear as I thought, he? If this wasn't Lizzie, then who? I grabbed the note and it read, "Can't wait to taste you again. Get healthy soon."
So, I was a 16-year-old girl growing up in a sheltered household. I was a nerd and I still am. I did a lot of online roleplay because I found it was a great outlet for my writing and I really enjoyed the people. On one forum, I met a guy named John. John and I had a lot of fun roleplaying, and eventually our characters ended up together, which brought on real feelings between us. He told me he was 17 and going to high school in Washington, while I lived in California. We would talk for hours online, messaging one another, sending pictures back and forth. Well, things took a step up when he asked me to go on video chat with him one day to prove that I was a girl. This was brought on because we found out that one of the more sexual roleplayers who cybered a lot online, which is basically having sexual roleplay, turned out not to be a female after all, but actually a dude. Seeing as I trusted John, I agreed and got on camera. He didn't have a cam, claiming that he used the family computer and couldn't convince his parents the need for one. My older brother was in the military at the time, so we had one to video chat with him. Eventually, being on cam with him became a regular thing. Just me sitting there on cam and him typing back. That's when he started to ask me to do more sexual things. It started out simple, like, give me your best sexy look, or bite your lower lip. I thought it was harmless flirting, and complied like an idiot. He would tell me he was falling for me, and I was beautiful, and me, being a teen girl with issues with my image, fell for every single line. We became boyfriend and girlfriend, as much as you can be with someone who you've never actually met. I was so desperate to make him happy and keep him around, because I'd had 2 boyfriends in the past, and both of them ended with heartache on both sides of the coin, so I was lonely. So, when he started to ask me to do more sexual things on camera, and I hesitated, he would always use the line, "I thought you loved me," and I'd cave. For a long time, I felt ashamed of myself and dirty. Now I just feel stupid. He would send me pictures of his penis via well-placed digital camera angles that never actually showed his face, that he would upload and email to me. It made me uncomfortable, but I wasn't going to make him angry and tell him to stop, because I thought I needed him. Then, things got worse. We texted back and forth, but when I wouldn't text him back right away, he would start bombarding me with messages of why I hated him and why I wouldn't answer him, and claims of me cheating on him. It was overstressing me so much that I finally caved and told one of my female friends about it, and she told me that his behavior was abusive and I should tell him to knock it off or break up with him. So, I did. The next time he went off on me, I told him, "I'm not okay with you emotionally manipulating me, so either stop it or we're done." He lost his shit, started cussing up a storm, calling me names, saying I was a horrible person. So, I told him we were over. I cried for about 2 days, which is forever in teen girl time. It hurt, but my friend consoled me and told me it was for the best, and that I'd move on to something more healthy. He started to message me every time I got online. His messages ranged from calling me names to begging me to take him back because he loved me. I finally blocked him and left the forum game where I had first met him. He would make a new Yahoo account and message me again with the same shit. Then he started telling me he was now suicidal because of me, and that I should feel sorry that he was going to kill himself. Because I'm a nice person, I fell for it, hook, line, and sinker. We talked for hours via text, and I took him back if he promised not to hurt himself. He said he wouldn't hurt himself if he could see me again online, so I got on cam with him. Then he told me to do more sexual things for him, and I tried to say no, but he said if I cared about him I would, or he was going to slit his wrists. My friend's words popped back into my head of, "You're a good girl and you deserve someone who isn't going to manipulate you." I told him no, to fuck off, and to not message me anymore. I blocked him, made a new email, and thought it was done. Fast forward about 2 weeks. I had not heard anything from him in these past 2 weeks. No texts or emails or anything. I thought I was in the clear and done with him. One day, after school, I was waiting by the bus stop in front of the school to head home. I wasn't alone, but in a crowd of classmates and friends as we waited. Suddenly, a brown sedan pulled up, and a man in his mid-20s stepped out of the car and started saying my name. I looked around because A, I was in a crowd of people, and B, my first name is very common, so I thought maybe he was talking to someone else. That's when he walked straight up to me and grabbed me, very roughly by the shoulders, and started pulling me towards his car. I screamed out for him to let me go, but his fingers were like iron. Luckily, the other students took action, and some of the guys rushed the dude and tackled him to the ground, while some others went to get our school police officer. He kept screaming my name and telling them to let him go and that he was my boyfriend. I was stunned, to say the least. The cops came and put him in cuffs. Apparently, this man was John. He lied to me about his age and where he was from. He had tracked me down to what school I went to, which he discovered from a school sweater I had worn one day on webcam. The cops searched his car and found rope, duct tape, sleeping pills, some woman's clothing, and a big fucking knife. After the investigation, my parents told me what his plan was from his testimony. He was going to, quote unquote, take me away, and we were going to get married and be happy. It still makes me shiver to this day. I've kicked myself for years over how stupid I was to give this person I knew nothing about information about me, as well as manipulating me into doing what I did on webcam. He had a record, from what my mother told me, that included the rape of a girl when he was 19 and she was 14. The last time I saw him was when the cops took him away, and he just kept staring at me from the back of the police car, crying.
Let me first get this out of the way. I love Disneyland. I always have. The Haunted Mansion, Pirates of the Caribbean, Space Mountain. Call me a goofball if you want. I love them all. As long as I can remember, there was always a certain rush of magical excitement whenever I talked about it. That smell of the train's axle grease, mixed with fresh popcorn, just as you take your first steps down Main Street. Your first glimpse of Sleeping Beauty's castle, sitting bright and vibrant against the Southern California sun. The wonderful dilemma of having to choose between the Matterhorn or Mr. Toad's Wild Ride. All this comes with one caveat: the crowds. But with such great adventures about to happen, who cares? We're all there for the same reason. Well, not everyone. These feelings I have towards the happiest place on earth were ones I so wanted to share one day with my own kids. And for the most part, I have. My son, who's 10 years old, is just now appreciating the magic. Admittedly, however, not as much as I did at his age. But last week I saw his excitement finally spill over as we parked the car and hopped on the tram for our annual summer visit. In late August, the crowds sometimes thin out as school seasons are beginning. This is different for us, having homeschooled our sons since the 4th grade. We have more freedom with our schedules than most, and this trip to Disneyland has become our unofficial end to summer and a start to a school year. We all have our favorite rides. My wife and I, the Haunted Mansion, of course. My son's favorite, surprisingly, is the Jungle Cruise. Looking back, it was a fitting place to meet them while waiting in line for a ride with the Savage Survivalist theme. A boat ride where everything goes wrong and you're attacked by all sorts of wild animals. Because that's what they were. Wild animals. They seemed normal enough, a wholesome family of 5 and friendly as can be. It was the young boy, about the same age as my son, that started the conversation. I hadn't noticed that they were talking, but soon we all became locked in an enthusiastic conversation about our favorite place in the whole world. And they sure knew their stuff. Like what years the rides were built, oral histories about rides long gone. And when I heard the dad, Walter, call his daughter Ariel, I knew these people were hardcore Disney folk. Walter and Belle have been together for over 20 years, and with their 3 kids, Ariel, Donald, and Woody, make up the most intense Disneylanders one could ever meet. Everything about them was branded by Disney in some way or another, from the matching mouse ear t-shirts, or the branded lanyards filled with collectible pins right down to Ariel's pink Minnie Mouse sneakers. Even the teenager of the group, Woody, wore his fair share of Magic Kingdom flair. And they talked about the place as if it was their home, even addressing some employees by their first names. Funny thing, the employees certainly didn't respond as if they knew them or even recognized them. It was nothing but confused looks in return. Maybe that should have been the first sign we could have picked up on, or the fact that they were all named after Disney characters. But we didn't. In fact, after the first ride, we became Disney pals, so to speak. We went on a few more rides together and it was nice, especially for my son. Since he homeschools, making friends can be challenging, and watching him mix it up with Ariel and Donald was really gratifying. Both Walter and Belle were super nice, and we were filled to the brim with all sorts of Disneyana facts. Woody, however, was not so friendly. He would stand there quiet and observant. But he was a teenager after all. After a ride on Peter Pan's flight, we stopped off to get a refreshing cola and have a quick seat to rest. We sat together in the shade as we waited for the kids to finish their drinks. Meanwhile, Walter's Disneyland story started to become strange. "I'm actually a lifetime member of Club 33, Walter said at one point out of nowhere with an infectious enthusiasm. For those unaware, Club 33 is an exclusive, nearly impossible to get into, VIP-only private club located in New Orleans Square. It was hard to swallow that he was a lifetime member, and my gut instinct called this out as bullshit. But his promise of us having lunch at this exclusive club kept my doubts at bay. "Let's do a few more rides, then head over," he said. I politely tried to steer in the direction of breaking away, but he insisted we join them. I could see that look in my wife's eyes, the one that's telling me to man up and, cut the cord. But hey, Club 33 is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. As we got up to leave, I noticed Walter take my son's empty soda cup from him. He proceeded to dump the leftovers into the trash can, then take the Mouser lid and straw combo. He handed it over to Belle, who placed it in her fanny pack. Walter looked at me and smiled his bright white row of teeth. "Everything's a souvenir," he said. We should have left them right then and there, but we didn't. Instead, the kids began deciding which ride to go on next, and being the pacifists my wife and I are, we just went along with it. My son broke out his park map to give it a look. Somewhere in the process, he gave himself a nice and deep paper cut across his thumb. I didn't notice until we were all waiting in line at the Haunted Mansion, when I heard Ariel explain to my son that he should suck on the cut to stop the bleeding. Gave him a napkin to use instead. She kept insisting that he suck on the cut. It bothered me. Something about it was unnerving. But later, within the darkness of the stretchy elevator, when I saw Ariel with my son's thumb in her mouth, that my unnerving turned into terror. I was frozen in shock at what I was seeing, and so was my son. She was sucking the blood from his cut. My fatherly instinct grabbed his hand and pulled it away from the little mouth. She looked at us both as innocent as a porcelain doll, stoic and calm. I looked around to see if my wife had noticed, but Walter was talking her ear off. In fact, everyone's ears. This ride was the last one Mr. Disney worked on himself before he died. He boasted out to the annoyance of everyone in line. I tried to corral my family so we could ride together, but in the non-stop conveyor belt commotion, I saw my wife ride away with Belle and I was stuck with Walter. I made sure my son was squeezed in with me. Ariel and Donald rode together. Woody rode alone. For the duration of my favorite ride, Walter proceeded to explain away details from every scene we passed through. The hydraulics and the animatronics, the techniques used to create the holograms. I learned more than I ever needed to or ever wanted, sitting there while he systematically ruined my most favorite and cherished dark ride. But even more disturbing to me was the little bloodsucker in the car behind us, and my wife sitting next to God knows what to our front. We were trapped. All they wanted to do was get us the hell off this thing and away from them. As the ride finally came to an end, the narrator's warning, "Beware of hitchhiking ghosts." I rushed us off and asked the first employee I saw where I could find a first aid station. Who knows what kind of disease these people could be carrying? And that girl was sucking on my son's fresh cut. Walter tried to steer us toward Club 33. I took my family's hand once we were entangled amongst the crowd and changed course to Main Street. "Keep walking. Don't look back." My wife understood what I was doing and went along. We walked briskly, navigating the scores of people for what seemed like forever, hoping those weirdos were not behind us. Once we got to Main Street, I finally glanced back and saw nothing. We lost them. I nervously dumped gobs of first aid ointment on my son's thumb, explaining to my wife what I saw. "You're not going to believe what I saw either," she replied, as I wrapped a Disney-themed Band-Aid around my son's greasy thumb. There was no time to discuss. We needed to make a decision. We ultimately decided that instead of leaving the park altogether, to head over to the sister property, California Adventure. We did pay for a park hopper pass, and those darn things aren't cheap. Why let some freaks ruin our last day of summer? Fuck them! Plus, we were super hungry. We sat in the corner of the most out-of-the-way eatery we could find, and started to relax as our food digested. I told my wife about the paper cut sucking incident, and she told me what she had seen. It was just as disturbing. While on the Haunted Mansion, she got a glimpse inside Bella's fanny pack where she saw a clear plastic bag with stuff in it. "What kind of stuff?" I asked. "Used tissues. Gobs of matted hair as if pulled from a hairbrush. Flattened out Disney soda cups. Remnants of someone's leftover fast food from the park. What looked like to my wife, a used, dry, and blood-crusted tampon. And to top this all off, our son's Mouser soda lid straw combo that Walter had taken earlier. We sat there stunned, almost paralyzed to even move. The only thought that came to my mind was, what the fuck? Look! There's Woody! My son stood up and pointed at him. I turned to see his tall and hunched-over lanky figure pass by in the crowds. He was alone. I quietly set my son down and tried to make like a hole in the wall. My wife and I locked eyes again. We knew it was time to go home. But when we got up, they came into the eatery out of nowhere. Where'd you guys go? Walter belted out with a giant smile full of teeth. They took their seats, blocking us in. I glanced over at Woody, sitting a few tables down all by himself and grinning like a madman. He was following us. Well, what should we ride next, friends? There was a slight change in Walter's voice as he spoke, like he knew we were onto them. I think we're heading home. He wasn't buying my wife's lie. Home? It's barely 2. We sat there, trapped again. Then, an idea hit me. I mustered up my best polite person persona and suggested another ride. Mickey's Fun Wheel. Their kids lit up with excitement. My wife looked at me like I had 5 eyeballs. I tried to play along and tried to act just as excited. We can get a car all to ourselves and ride together! Walter was overcome with joy. While waiting in line, my wife was squeezing my hand so hard I thought she was gonna break it. But I had a plan, and it was nearing go time, especially as we inched closer to the loading platform. The most important thing was to keep this family of freaks in front of us. Every time my son mingled too close to the front, I'd pull him back as inconspicuous as possible, keeping us together. And it was working, except for Woody, who kept lingering behind us. There were only 3 groups ahead of us, and my heart was lodged in my throat. If this plan didn't work, I'm not sure what we could do next. I had to execute this perfectly. The big gamble was how many rides per car, which was 8. Perfect. It was our turn next to board, and I had managed to get us in the perfect position. They were to our front, and therefore we boarded first. Even that creep Woody. When the wheel turned and our gondola was ready, I casually took my family's hands. Game time. Once the freak show boarded, I pulled my wife and son off to the side and squeezed us back through the line. We quickly made our way past puzzled faces until we reached the nearest place to exit. I looked back to the magnificent wheel now starting to turn, where I saw those creepers crammed into their gondola. Trapped. My plan had worked. I met Walter's eyes one last time before they disappeared higher into the sky. They were pure darkness. We spent no time getting out of there, not even waiting for the tram, and hightailing back to the parking structure. Once we got into the car, I let out a huge sigh of relief. What are you doing? Start the damn car! My wife was not so relieved, and she wouldn't be until we were completely out of there. I started the car and backed out, looking first to my son in the back seat. A feeling of anger came over me. What a shitty day for him. I noticed his Band-Aid was gone. It fell off somewhere, he said. Fitting, I thought. We drove home in silence. It's been exactly 1 week since our doomed trip to the happiest place on earth. We've had a few family talks about not letting things get in the way of our fun time, no matter where we are. We shouldn't let that bizarre experience get in the way of future visits. I mean, shit happens, right? I was feeling real optimistic about everything, until I went to collect the mail yesterday. There was a plain, unmarked envelope mixed with the week's mail. I opened it, and inside was my son's Band-Aid, along with a note written on it. It's a small world. It read, "Everything's a souvenir. Your friends, Walter."
The most terrifying day of my life began early one morning in 2015. I don't want to give away too many details. I don't want the person at fault here to be able to gain any satisfaction from this retelling, so I apologize if I seem overly vague when it comes to describing people or places. It all started one afternoon when I decided to unwind after work with some video games. I live with my brother, who finishes his daily shift a few hours after I do. It was his console, so from about 3:30 to 6 p.m. every day, I can actually have that thing to myself without the danger of him claiming it back to play Call of Duty, which he obsesses over. Driving games were more my things, still are, I suppose. I'm a real gearhead, and it was my dream to live out on the California coast, so I guess you can call it escapism. That and the idea of beefing with people over voice chat just didn't appeal to me. But as I came to learn, sometimes it's simply unavoidable. So I'm winning round after round of this particular game when I started getting griefing messages from some salty moron. They weren't happy that I was using a setup that they called OP and demanded I change my settings to see if I was skilled enough a driver as I thought I was. I sent him back a lol, told him no, and carried on playing. Next round finishes, and this time a flurry of messages start pinging their way towards me at an astonishing rate. I don't know if this guy was using a USB keyboard or whatever, but the grief came thick and fast. At the time, I just thought it was funny how anyone could get so irate over something as small as a video game was beyond me. So, as you can imagine, I just sent a few messages back telling the guy how pathetic I thought he was being. Then the guy just rage quit, or at least I figured he had. He wasn't in the game anymore, and from what I could tell, he was either offline or had blocked me. But he did send one final message before he did. "You deserve what's about to happen. Rest in pieces." I have to admit, this did creep me out a little. Although I was mainly worried about him, like hacking the console or something. Like I said, it was my brother's, and he would not be happy if someone screwed up his COD sessions. However, a few hours go by, there's no problem with the internet connection or the console, so I figured the guy was just full of hot air and was just trying to scare me. And I just sort of forgot about the whole thing. I remember briefly telling my brother about it when he got home, and he thought the whole thing was funny. But other than that, yeah, it just didn't register with me. We had dinner, watched a little TV, shared some beers, and then went to bed, the usual routine. The next thing I remember was being shaken awake by my brother. There was no light coming through the cracks in the curtains, so I had no idea what time of night it was. But as I'm slowly rousing myself from a deep, dreamless sleep, the fear I heard in his voice had my heart going from 0 to 60. "Wake up! There's people trying to break in," he hissed. When I looked, I saw he had his pistol in his hand. He was deadly serious. This was no dumb prank, and I could see from the look in his eyes that our lives might actually be in danger. Everything was kind of a blur after that. He hadn't called the cops yet. He'd rushed into my room right after he grabbed his gun, so that was the first thing I did. I grabbed my phone and immediately called 911. It's in the middle of explaining to the dispatcher that we were in the middle of a home invasion that I heard my brother scream something about the guys outside being armed. They sent me into overdrive. I was pleading with the woman on the other end of the line to send help, but when I told her our street address, she seemed to get all cagey. Right when I was panicking the most, she asked me to hold the line. Instead of reassuring me anything to let me know that help was on the way, she literally said, "Hold the line, please, sir." And then silence. Silence until I heard the shots, 5 of them to be exact, something that's completely burned in my memory. The distinct pop, 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 pop that I described to the police over and over again. Then there was screaming, my brother barking at the invaders outside. He'd shot at one of them, and his aim had been true. There was more screaming, too. My sister-in-law was hiding somewhere in the house and was wailing with panic now that the shots had been fired. I was so scared I just ran to my closet, crouched down and shut the door. I tried to keep as low as possible while staying on the line with the dispatcher, but each second seemed to drag itself out into an eternity as all I could do was wait and listen. Then I heard the words that made my jaw drop and had me hanging up the phone immediately. "This is the police. Put down your weapons to surrender to the officers immediately." Not exactly what was said, but I won't reveal exactly that because they used my real name. I remember seeing my brother on the stoop outside, his hands held high in the air as a few extremely bright lights illuminated and blinded him. I was convinced they were going to kill him. I mean, the shots he'd fired, the ones I thought were aimed at some violent intruder, he'd shot at the freaking cops. Not just shot at them either. He hit one, I know he did. A bunch of times, too. As far as I was concerned at the time, he'd killed a cop, and how was he not dead himself? They arrested my sister-in-law and I and took us down to the station. I had no idea what was about to unfold. I was convinced my brother was about to get life in prison for killing a cop. But the truth of the matter and how that situation ended was something I never could have expected. We came to find out that my brother was facing absolutely no charges. None. He had fired at a cop, and I was right, had in fact hit them, but was still facing no charges. It was all because of that video game I'd been playing. The salty guy who was messaging me had somehow found out my IP, then used that to pin down my social media details, which he then used to find out my address. Then, he waited until the following morning to swat us, which he did so with horrifying efficiency. Long story short, because the cops hadn't followed protocol and announced themselves properly, my brother had no idea it was them, hence why he opened fire in the first place. The cop he shot was wearing a state-of-the-art bulletproof vest, military style with armor plates. Each round hit the plate. So other than some bad bruising, the cop was able to walk away. That night was probably the worst experience of my life, but I still play video games. Whoever it was that almost ruined our lives will never have the satisfaction of thinking he had put me off gaming. I still play, every night almost, and I will continue to do so as long as I'm able.
I know it's cliché, the typical creeper on a dating website thing, but this is my story, and it still shakes me to this day. I didn't have much dating experience at the time. This was back in 2008, and I was going to be a junior in college. I lived in a small town outside of Tacoma, Washington, and attended a university nearby. I was home for the summer, and I wasn't taking summer classes that year. I was 20 years old at the time. I had an account on several dating sites, but I wasn't looking for anything serious. One day, in early July, I received a message from someone called Anna Richardson about maybe meeting up, as she lived in Tacoma and attended Everest College. She was a year younger, going into her sophomore year. I checked out her profile, and she had several pictures in addition to her icon. She was interested in art and literature, was majoring in mathematics, listened to EDM and alt-rock, and played soccer. The woman in the photos was very attractive. She seemed pretty legit, and we seemed to have some things in common, so I agreed. We messaged on the site first. She was thinking we could have dinner at a local Italian restaurant and go for a walk afterwards. I thought that sounded fine, and suggested we meet at the restaurant on Saturday at 7 or so. She said she was thinking that I could pick her up from her apartment, as she didn't have a car to use at the time because she had recently gotten into a crash. This was kind of strange to me, and I wondered why she couldn't ask someone for a ride. But I stupidly agreed to pick her up, and she gave me her address. I wanted to be seen as a gentleman by my date. All of this proved to be my biggest mistake. We then exchanged phone numbers, and we spoke on the phone only once, and it was brief, just discussing the details of the date again. I'd pick her up at her place at around 6:30, and we'd go to the restaurant at 7. It was a female's voice on the phone, and it didn't sound old or anything, so I wasn't really worried about anything. So, on Saturday, I got directions to her place and set off. She lived in a pretty nice section of town, in a townhome. With 3 stories, that was a condo type thing, I guess. She informed me that her landlord owned the building, and lived on the first floor, and rented out the top 2 floors. Anna lived on the 3rd floor. There was a set of stairs on the side of the townhome, where there was a door to each floor, but the first floor also had a front door. It was kind of a weird setup. I went up the side stairs to the 3rd floor and knocked on the door. It felt like I waited there forever, about 5 minutes, before someone answered. A rather large, middle-aged man with the most bizarre look on his face opened the door. I don't even know how to describe it. Other than that, there wasn't anything weird about his appearance or outfit. Now, my warning bells are going off, but I guess I had the idiotic thought that maybe he was her dad. So I dumbly said, is Anna here? But decided it was time to get out of there, and I didn't wait for a response, and tried to turn around. He literally grabbed my arm and rasped, "I'm Anna." I was smaller, shorter, and much younger than him, so it would have been quite hard for me to fend him off. I kept trying to wrench away unsuccessfully, and began screaming for help as he repeatedly tried to pull me through the door, and then finally just let me go. I didn't hesitate to take this opportunity to get the heck out of there, and thankfully, he didn't try and follow me. I got into my car and went home. I was frustrated that no one had heard and tried to help me, and immensely freaked out, naturally. I didn't know if I should go to the police and tell them, or even what they'd do if I did. That evening, I told my roommate the whole story when I got home. He knew I was going on a date, but didn't know the circumstances and obviously didn't know about the guy. He convinced me to report it to the police, and to take pictures of Anna and I's messages if I still had them, just in case. I went down to our local police station the next day and informed them of the whole thing, and provided them with the pictures. I kind of got the vibe that they weren't taking me seriously, but they said that they would go down to the guy's house to question him about it. They had me file a report. Now, this is the really crazy part. The police telephoned me the following morning. I wanted to hear from them sooner, but whatever, I know they're busy. They told me to come by, because they had some information about the guy. So, I did. And they told me that the guy had just seemingly vanished. They spoke to the landlord, and she said he must have left in the middle of the night because his car was gone that morning. I guess the landlord had a key and opened the door to his apartment, even though they didn't have a search warrant. But all his stuff was apparently there. The landlord told them that she didn't know much about the guy, but that he seemed normal enough but didn't leave his apartment much. She provided them with his name. They did a background check. Nothing. The police advised me to delete my account on the website, and suggested that I change my phone number just in case, so I did. They told me at that point there wasn't much else they could do. I never got any follow-ups or updates on my report, and I never encountered that guy again. Of course, I still have many questions. Who did I speak to on the phone? It wasn't a pre-recorded call, because she addressed me by name and knew what I was talking about. Who was the girl in the pictures? I don't know where he got them from, and I didn't know about reverse image search at the time. And finally, what were his plans? It was so bizarre.
The requirements for this job are so easy that I think an idiot could do it. Stand around all day in a bulky, annoying costume. Wave to tourists, take pictures, and, of course, the number one rule, don't scare the kids. It didn't seem possible to mess up. Just a summer gig to get a little side hustle until fall semester. But that isn't what happened to me. My summer as a Disney-themed cast member character nearly ruined my life. And nearly ended it. I'm not trying to be overly dramatic here and say that what happened to me can happen to anyone that gets this job. I truthfully believe I was in the wrong place at the wrong time. My job was goofy. You know, that lovable talking dog that only goes, yuck, 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 and gosh. I was normally around Main Street USA attraction, and keeping customers busy with photos and laughs all day long. The shifts weren't bad. The money was good and the kids were mostly nice. Mostly. I think one of the strange things about being a silent actor is how often you hear people's personal lives as they take pictures or pass by. It's this built-in sense of trust, I think. They just assume you are trustworthy, or ignore you maybe. Usually what I would hear wasn't anything of importance, like where they were going to go for dinner, or maybe what ride they would check out next. A few of them would say obnoxious things to me, knowing that I couldn't talk back, but I didn't care. It was good money. I wasn't going to cause a fuss. That changed a few weeks after I started working, and this little kid came up to me for a photo. I did the usual wave to him, a few gentle chuckles, and then he just stood as still as a statue and whispered to me,
"I think someone is trying to hurt me."
I froze, unsure how even to respond. His guardians were a short distance away where they couldn't hear me, but it's not like my employee manual came equipped with this scenario. I nervously chuckled and took the picture, the brief snippet of conversation we had over an instance as his grown-ups tugged him away. He looked up at me with sad eyes as he left, enough to tell me that he had been hoping I could help him out of whatever situation he was in. I was trying not to panic and ignore the nagging sense of doubt. I should have done something. I knew the longer I waited, the more likely this kid was in danger. So I took a break and called my supervisor, who was working over in the animal kingdom. "Sal, I'm sorry to bother you, but the strangest thing just happened," I told him. Briefly described the situation and asked what I should do, and he told me he would get back with me soon enough. But that just made more time pass, more chance for this kid to get hurt. Rather than wait for my supervisor to make a decision, I went over to the security office near Main Street and reported the incident to them as well. "And around what time was this?" the officer asked. "Probably 3:30, I said as they started to check the cameras in the back. They fast-forwarded the tapes until I pointed my finger in the image and said, "That's him, right there." I was a little relieved to see that as we checked the tapes, the family hadn't left the parks yet. That meant there was still time to act. It's not like they're trying to act suspicious or anything. They're going on rides, buying collectibles. Normal stuff," the guard said. My boss added to this with a call that told me no missing persons had been reported in the last 48 hours. I looked at the images again, concerned that neither of them were taking this seriously. "Shouldn't we at least check this out and make sure they aren't up to something?" I asked.
"There isn't any reason to interrupt their family vacation, but if we hear other reports from across the park, maybe then."
"I'm sorry," the boss said. Maybe it was because I was new and didn't understand how any of this worked, but it felt like they were basically treating a kid's safety as less important than the money they were making from the family in the park. We couldn't possibly be that expendable, could we? I made a mental note of the last location of the family, the Jungle Cruise attraction. I told them both thanks for at least looking into the matter. The truth was, I was determined to go find out whether this kid was in danger or not, once and for all. First, I returned to my dressing room and got my Goofy costume. No one pays attention to mascots. If I got to the ride and went on it to find the family, no one would bat an eye. I knew leaving my post might get me fired, but I didn't care. I was positive a kid's life was on the line. When I got to the Jungle Cruise, I asked the ride operator if a family had gotten on the ride in the last 15 minutes and had gotten off. He gave me that half-interested look and told me he thought I was pulling a prank. "Please, check?" I insisted. He brought in all of the boats a few minutes later, and I saw traces of blood in one of them. They must have slipped away off the ride. I knew that there were plenty of exits throughout the ride in case it ever had an outage, so it wasn't outrageous to assume maybe they had taken one of them. I started up the ride and went into the cruise, frantically searching for any other signs of a struggle. My radio went off as I went further downstream.
"If you don't turn around and get back here right now, you're fired."
My boss. He must have called my bluff, I realized. At the same time, I heard a muffled scream and looked up between the various jungle brush, just in time to see the kid struggling to escape the woman's arms. "I'm on my way!" I shouted, climbing off the boat and jumping to the shore. The kidnappers looked at me like I was insane as I climbed over the equipment to reach them. But when they realized I was the same costume mascot from earlier, one of them drew a knife and placed it against the boy's neck. "Make another move and he's a goner," they warned. I could already tell they had cut the poor boy a few times as a warning not to struggle. "What are you doing? Why would you hurt an innocent kid?" I asked. "Are you fucking kidding? Ransom is the oldest, most profitable business in the book. And anyone who can afford to take their kid to Disney during a pandemic is definitely loaded," The second one snarled. I had to think fast to save him. Then I recalled the part of the ride we were on and took a step back. The kidnapper moved toward me, thinking I was perhaps going to escape. Then, an animatronic elephant reared its trunk out and smacked him right in the face. I moved in a split second, leaping to the kid and grabbing his hand as the kidnapper fell into the waters below. A second later, one of the boats came over top of them, smashing them. What happened after was routine, for the most part. I guided the kid out and gave him over to the authorities. We later found out that the kidnappers had targeted his family earlier in the Magic Kingdom and were holding them ransom in the hotel. All in all, it was a happy Disney ending, except for me. My boss fired me anyway for being insubordinate. I know it isn't fair, but I doubt I'll ever forget my time there either.
I live in a not so large and not so friendly block of apartments. Well, it's really more of a converted old Victorian house, which is now modified into 5 small apartments per block. The main door is really crappy and still hasn't been replaced, even though the entire building has been refurbished. This is the case despite the landlord promising it would be done by the new year. Anyway, this door doesn't lock when you close it. It has to be locked manually, either by the key from the outside or by the twisty lock on the inside. Unfortunately, people who live around me can be, well, let's say rude. And that's putting it kindly. They're always blasting music until late, setting off the fire alarm, which is linked in every apartment and is super loud and annoying. But most annoyingly, always, and I mean always, people are leaving the main door unlocked. This was something more than an annoyance, up until very recently, when something truly horrific happened to me. It was a Thursday night, and as usual, I was getting ready for bed at around 11 p.m. And as usual, despite it being a weekday, one of the surrounding apartments is having a party. Again, it's the weekday, and this was annoying because who throws a party on a Thursday? I mean, just wait for Friday. Not only that though, it's supposed to be a lockdown, so while other people can't see their own families, me included, you get to keep everyone up. The music was noticeable, but not super loud from the comfort of my bedroom, thankfully. So I do what I always do when I go to bed. I put on some scary stories. I chill, and I try to go to sleep. So I finally managed to drift off at around 12 o'clock, and I'm awakened for the first time at around 2 because of the music. So I get up and I go to the bathroom as I thought I might as well since I'm already up. So being annoyed and frustrated, I get back into bed and continue to enjoy my stories until I'm asleep. I'm suddenly awoken by loud stumps coming up the stairs. I live at the very top of the building, so the final staircase only leads to my door. Now I'm more than exhausted, more exhausted than angry. So I just lie there, awake, until I hear something that jolts my half-asleep brain fully awake. My door being pushed open. Someone is actually trying to push open my door and enter my apartment without my permission. Not hard or forcefully, mind you. Not like they were trying to break it, but they definitely were trying to gain entry. Now this may be because my mind was still foggy, or that I was still so tired that I didn't care, but I just stupidly assumed that someone in a drunken stupor was trying to get into the wrong place. Maybe the party was at a different top floor apartment, I thought. So I ignored it. Even when it happened again, I could hear scratching and mumbling on the other side. Stupid, I know, but I really just wanted to go to sleep. So the next morning, I woke up as normal and got ready for work as I opened my door to leave. And what do I see? 2 men asleep on the floor, blocking my way, and one of them bleeding from his head. Now, I'm not judgmental, or at least I try not to be, but these men were clearly homeless. I mean, the smell alone told me that. It was like having a ball of dirt slapped in your face. Not ideal for an early morning start. When I eventually got one of them to get up, the other failed to do so. He was clearly on drugs. It was completely out of it. Thankfully for me, the man was okay. I mean, I could have been rushed or anything, but he explained to me that he had been attacked and chased, so they took shelter here. so I offered to call the ambulance, which the men eventually accepted through a one-sided conversation of murmurs and groans. So I stepped out to get a better look at the man on the ground. As I did so, the other man stepped inside of my apartment. I just stared at him with our eyes locking. He reached in his pocket and I postured up ready to fight. He looked at the other man and he just shook his head as if he were saying no. And thankfully he just came back out without incident, and I locked my door. The ambulance eventually came. I informed my landlord of this, and he said that he would warn the other people living there that they must keep the door locked. But of course, every morning I go to work, the door is wide open with no consequence. But the real kicker is, because that guy was bleeding and was homeless, I didn't want to clean it myself and had to get professional cleaners to do so. And when I asked for my landlord to chip in, he just ignored me for days. And when he eventually got back to me, he said it's not that big of a deal. So I ended up paying for the whole thing myself, because I just didn't feel comfortable with that being around me. Now I don't believe those men had intentions to hurt me. But what if I didn't lock my door? What if they had gotten in? When people are desperate and opportunities present themselves, you really don't know what people would do. Two of them and one of me, asleep and alone, pretty scary when you think about it, right?
This happened quite some years ago, when I was around 15. Have you ever experienced this in the past, when walking by an abandoned building, getting that overwhelming urge to explore? This is what happened to me. My friend told me there was an absurd abandoned building which was not so far away from where I lived. I didn't know what he meant by absurd, but I remember being as excited as, well, a schoolboy. My friend told me about this place the day before the start of summer vacation. We were both excited and eager to check the place out, so we ended up visiting the abandoned building straight after school with some kids that we weren't even that friendly with. It took a long time for the kids to all gather outside of the school. When all 8 of us had actually arrived, the sun was beginning to go down. We followed my friend who knew the way like a row of ants. When we actually got there, I remember feeling very disappointed. I was expecting a house with the roof rotting away, the windows smashed, the kind of house that screamed, "I'm haunted." In reality, the abandoned building was quite clean. The only strange thing about it was the location, as it was slightly out of town in the countryside. All of the other kids seemed to be disappointed too, but having come all this way, we decided to explore the place all the same. After some discussion, we cautiously entered through the back door. Looking inside, there were strange things lying all around the place. Beakers, cylinders, microscopes. They were the kind of things you expect to find in the science room at a school. We figured there was no way this was a normal house. But what grabbed my attention the most wasn't the strange instruments lying all around the place, but the massive bookshelf, stuffed from end to end. There were also a few books lying in a pile in front of the shelf. It was obvious that someone had recently messed around with some of these books. We soon found out who the culprit was. It was the friend who had told us about the building in the first place. He asked us all a question.
Do you know why I said this place was absurd?
He pointed towards a specific book and told us to open it. We did, and gasped, horrified. The book was filled with pictures of dead men and women, some with their skin peeled off. Even the friend who had seen the book before became silent and looked uncomfortable. But at that moment, I realized something. Isn't this just the house of a doctor? Although still slightly scared, there was a murmur of agreement from the group, and, as it so often does, logic and reasoning helped relieve some of the tension built up from the fear of the unknown. While the rest of the group looked through other books in the bookshelf, I decided to explore some of the other rooms in the house. The kitchen, living room, bathroom, toilet. After looking through the whole of the first floor, I realized that the person who was living here must have been extremely well educated. It was the style of the house. Even being just 15 years of age, I knew that the furniture was of very good quality. The interior of the house was designed so efficiently, and everything was beautifully packed in, utilizing all of the space available perfectly. Considering all of this, the person who lived here must have been a hard-working doctor or medicine student. I overheard one of the guys saying that a mad scientist must live here. I remember being annoyed at that and thinking he was a moron. The group quickly became bored of looking through the books, and since it was getting late, we all decided to end the exploration for that day. However, as we continued to explore the first floor, we realized something strange. Even after thoroughly exploring, we found no stairs going to the second floor, but it was obvious when looking at the house from the outside that there was indeed a second floor. Using our small brains, we figured that there would be a flight of stairs outside of the building, but there wasn't. One of our friends found the remnants of perhaps a stairway. If there had been stairs there, they'd definitely been taken down. One of us suggested that perhaps there was something hidden on the second floor. We all made fantastical suggestions as to what could be up there. This immediately sent us into an excited frenzy, and all thoughts of going home vanished from our minds. There was a widespread consent. We just had to see the second floor. We figured that entering through the outside would be easier. We looked around the building and found some pipes that would be easy to climb. To see if it was safe, the best tree climber of the group went to test out the route. That was me. It was easy to climb, but something came to my attention which alarmed me. You couldn't see anything through the upstairs windows. They'd been covered up by newspapers and marker pens, so that barely any light could shine through. As everybody climbed onto the roof of the house, I told them about the closed-off windows, and this seemed to frighten some of them. A few of them decided to go back home. Those were the smart ones. Those of us who stayed behind took a vote on whether we should enter the second floor. In the end, curiosity won. As I led the way to the window, I was half happy, half in deep regret of the decision. There was no choice now, though. I had talked the big talk about checking it out, and I didn't want to look like a coward by backing out now. I summoned all of the courage I had available, and I swung open the window. I gasped. Right in front of me was a woman in a swimsuit, with a large grin plastered on her face. I screamed and thought my heart was going to stop, but then my friend began to laugh at me and patted me on the shoulder. It was just a poster. Everybody laughed. I remember feeling so relieved I couldn't even be bothered to get angry. I looked at the poster again as I tried to enter, and something caught my attention. There was lipstick on the poster where the woman's lips were. Although I thought that was strange, I entered the house, and the guys followed me in. I found myself in an understandably dark and damp passageway. Up until that point, I had thought the individual who lived here was intelligent and had good taste. As we moved further in, the abnormality of the previous resident became more and more apparent. Along the passage were pictures of girls in bikinis and other infatuating costumes. Just this would have been okay, but the faces of the woman had been carved out and replaced with the faces of dead women, obviously taken from one of the books we had found on the first floor. Any positive thoughts I had in my mind vanished. It didn't matter if this was the previous resident who had done this, or a homeless person who had moved in. I looked at the faces of my friends around me. The consensus was, let's get the fuck out of here. As we set to return to the window we used to enter, my friend spoke up in a wavering voice.
There's someone there.
We pointed a flashlight in the direction he was pointing at. There was a door made out of glass at the end of the hallway, and as we all flashed our lights on the door, it became clear that there was a woman wearing nothing but her underwear, staring at us intently. In fact, as we stared, it became clear there were more people behind her, all facing our direction. We just stood there, pointing our lights towards them. We were scared shitless, expecting the woman to rush us. But as we stood there, we noticed that they weren't moving. We ventured towards the door, and as we got closer to it, it became apparent. The room was filled with female mannequins. There must have been 15 or 20 of the things, a miniature forest of mannequins. Someone whispered something about how creepy it all was. Everybody was thinking the same thing. The underwear the mannequins were wearing wasn't the functional type that women would normally wear. Even a school kid like me knew this. They were the type designed to infatuate men. It was like we had a glance into the mind of the person who had been living here. Someone shouted, as if to try and relieve the tension.
My god, the guy who was living here must have been a massive perv.
Everybody laughed. I felt a bit more calm and light-hearted after that. We decided to explore the place a bit more before going home. Looking around the room, there was also a broken TV, toys, a CD player, and a pile of magazines lying around. I opened one of the magazines, and sure enough, all of the women's faces in the magazine had been replaced with those of dead bodies. This in itself made me feel sick, but something caught my attention that made me feel even worse. The magazine was from this month. I went to go and show the others. As we all realized the predicament we were in, we heard something. A faint sound of something moving. Terrified, we all looked around the room in search of what could have caused that noise. We could see all the way to the end of the room. I could see all the books, furniture, and mannequins surrounding the room. That was when I noticed something else. In between the mannequins was a face. I saw a widespread grin, an expression of absolute maleficent glee. "You like these things?" It was a man's voice, but whoever he was, I could just about make out that he was wearing a dress. Someone let out a scream. We all started to panic and ran straight towards the exit. I was the last one out. As I jumped through the window and onto the roof, I heard him speak again. "You like?" When I heard that voice, I felt goosebumps rage all over my body. All I remember after that was jumping off of the roof and bolting for the hills. The kid who lived closest told his parents the events of that night, and the next day, the police went to investigate the building. By the time the police arrived, the building was empty. They checked again the following day, but the house was completely lifeless. The man in the house was never found, and the house itself has since been demolished. I once visited the place when I was older, but there was nothing left to see. It was as if all of us had imagined the incident of that night. Even now, when I see an abandoned building, I get the creeps.
I live in a not so large and not so friendly block of apartments. Well, it's really more of a converted old Victorian house, which is now modified into 5 small apartments per block. The main door is really crappy and still hasn't been replaced, even though the entire building has been refurbished. This is the case despite the landlord promising it would be done by the new year. Anyway, this door doesn't lock when you close it. It has to be locked manually, either by the key from the outside or by the twisty lock on the inside. Unfortunately, people who live around me can be, well, let's say rude, and that's putting it kindly. They're always blasting music until late, setting off the fire alarm, which is linked in every apartment and is super loud and annoying. But most annoyingly, always, and I mean always, people are leaving the main door unlocked. This was something more than an annoyance, up until very recently, when something truly horrific happened to me. It was a Thursday night, and as usual, I was getting ready for bed at around 11 p.m. And as usual, despite it being a weekday, one of the surrounding apartments is having a party. Again, it's the weekday, and this was annoying because who throws a party on a Thursday? I mean, just wait for Friday. Not only that though, it's supposed to be a lockdown. So while other people can't see their own families, me included, you get to keep everyone up. The music was noticeable, but not super loud from the comfort of my bedroom, thankfully. So I do what I always do when I go to bed. I put on some scary stories. I chill and I try to go to sleep. So I finally managed to drift off at around 12 o'clock, and I'm awakened for the first time at around 2 because of the music. So I get up and I go to the bathroom, as I thought I might as well since I'm already up. So being annoyed and frustrated, I get back into bed and continue to enjoy my stories until I'm asleep. I'm suddenly awoken by loud stumps coming up the stairs. I live at the very top of the building, so the final staircase only leads to my door. Now I'm more than exhausted, more exhausted than angry. So I just lie there, awake, until I hear something that jolts my half-asleep brain fully awake. My door being pushed open. Someone is actually trying to push open my door and enter my apartment without my permission. Not hard or forcefully, mind you. Not like they were trying to break it, but they definitely were trying to gain entry. Now this may be because my mind was still foggy, or that I was still so tired that I didn't care, but I just stupidly assumed that someone in a drunken stupor was trying to get into the wrong place. Maybe the party was at a different top floor apartment, I thought. So I ignored it. Even when it happened again, I could hear scratching and mumbling on the other side. Stupid, I know, but I really just wanted to go to sleep. So the next morning, I woke up as normal and got ready for work as I opened my door to leave. And what do I see? 2 men asleep on the floor, blocking my way, and one of them bleeding from his head. Now, I'm not judgmental, or at least I try not to be, but these men were clearly homeless. I mean, the smell alone told me that. It was like having a ball of dirt slapped in your face. Not ideal for an early morning start. When I eventually got one of them to get up, the other failed to do so. He was clearly on drugs. It was completely out of it. Thankfully for me, the man was okay. I mean, I could have been rushed or anything, but he explained to me that he had been attacked and chased, so they took shelter here. So I offered to call the ambulance, which the men eventually accepted through a one-sided conversation of murmurs and groans. So I stepped out to get a better look at the man on the ground. As I did so, the other man stepped inside of my apartment. I just stared at him with our eyes locking. He reached in his pocket and I postured up ready to fight. He looked at the other man and he just shook his head as if he were saying no. And thankfully he just came back out without incident, and I locked my door. The ambulance eventually came. I informed my landlord of this, and he said that he would warn the other people living there that they must keep the door locked. But of course, every morning I go to work, the door is wide open with no consequence. But the real kicker is, because that guy was bleeding and was homeless, I didn't want to clean it myself and had to get professional cleaners to do so. And when I asked for my landlord to chip in, he just ignored me for days. And when he eventually got back to me, he said it's not that big of a deal. So I ended up paying for the whole thing myself, because I just didn't feel comfortable with that being around me. Now, I don't believe those men had intentions to hurt me. But what if I didn't lock my door? What if they had gotten in? When people are desperate and opportunities present themselves, you really don't know what people would do. 2 of them and 1 of me, asleep and alone, pretty scary when you think about it, right?